You have data everywhere, but is it working together? Meet Curator, the automotive industry's first unified intelligence engine. Curator unifies data from all corners of your dealership to transform marketing, sales, and customer interactions. See it today at gubagoo.com.
Welcome to this weekend drive edition of Daily Drive for the fourth week in May 2025. I'm Jamie Butters, Executive Editor of Automotive News in Indianapolis.
And I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. We're breaking down some of the biggest stories in the auto industry from the past week and looking forward to what's in store in the days ahead. Today on the show, retail experts discuss how dealers are reacting to tariffs and economic uncertainty.
As you look at a holiday weekend, which is normally a great selling weekend like Memorial Day, you're not going to see aggressive incentives. I don't think you'll see aggressive advertising. I think everybody's being quite cost conscious at the OEM level, and appropriately so.
That's coming up in a few minutes. But first, Jamie, how you doing?
Doing all right, Kel. How about you?
Doing all right. You ready to get into some news?
Let's do it.
All right. So a report says that Toyota offered to help Nissan after talks with Honda fell apart. Oh, Jamie, the what ifs. How do you think this could have been structured with the world's largest automaker?
It's definitely in the what if realm. I think there's a couple of clues we can look at if this were to happen or if it would still happen, right? I think you look at the way Toyota has worked with Mazda and Subaru, a capital investment that buys, an equity stake, maybe just a few percent, maybe as much as double digits. And that can infuse some capital in, and it definitely signals stability to their, business partners, suppliers, and such. But also, joint projects on vehicles that can be mutually beneficial. The other thing, and sort of related to that, Akio Toyoda, as we read in Automotive News, he sort of criticized some of the talks around the potential Honda-Nissan merger because everything was about size and cost cutting. And his argument is, you have to be looking at making better products. And if your focus isn't on better products and better satisfaction for the customer, then you're just going to fail in a new structure. So, if they were to try to do something, you'd expect to see some kind of interesting product, maybe a hybrid that they could work on together, or, some new platform that would save some money.
Well, what reasons would Nissan have to not want to work with Toyota? I mean, they are the world's largest automaker.
Yeah. And so how do you ever come out from under that? Nissan's a very proud company, and until just this most recent era, was long the second largest Japanese automaker. Most Americans think of Honda as the number 2 Japanese brand and company, but Nissan was always number 2 just until these recent years. Now Honda is bigger, so it's hard enough for Nissan to accept being number 3 and potentially being the junior partner to Honda. Signing up with Toyota, you're kind of saying, oh, we're going to be, a kid brother or another cousin, like Subaru and Mazda. That was not how Nissan saw itself historically, but they're going to have to do something in order to stay viable and strong.
Gotcha. And Slate Auto draws 100,000 reservations for its bare bones EV mini truck. Does this prove that there's demand or maybe some interest in affordable EVs? If they're affordable, they will come.
Yeah, interest for sure. It's a $50 refundable deposit, so not a huge amount of skin in the game, but it's a lot of hand raisers. And I think this is something we've been talking about. Seems to be a lot of demand for affordable vehicles, and EVs have the potential to be even more affordable than a cheap gas or hybrid car because you don't have to pay for the gas. You don't have to pay for oil changes. There's just a lot of maintenance costs that an owner of an EV doesn't have to pay. If the Slate vehicle fits in your lifestyle, you can get it very affordably. They also have a lot of add-ons. So, we'll see how many of these deposits, how many of these hand raisers turn into actual sales. Depends on the execution, of the manufacturing as well as the sales process. A lot of challenges ahead, but I think you're right. It shows serious interest among American consumers for an affordable EV. I know some folks don't care if it comes from China or if it comes from, Michigan. They just want something that they can afford.
And finally, Jamie, while we're recording this, you're in Indianapolis for the Indy 500. What's going on there? And do you have your bottle of milk?
No, I don't know if I would even be allowed to bring a glass bottle of milk into the motor speedway. Yeah, I'm here for the 500-mile race. I went once when I was a kid. I went again a few years ago. I'm really excited to be on this trip because, well, I'm kind of a factory nerd. And I'm going to get to go visit Honda's Civic factory down in Greensburg. So that should be fun. That's a plant that's managed by one of our, 100 leading women in the North American auto industry, which we've been celebrating this past week. Roxana Metz, she is the head of that plant. So I look forward to seeing that. They're going to add the hybrid Civic there. It has been made in Japan. So some interesting politics around that decision and also the economics, of course. I'm also looking forward to, again, I mentioned the nerd part. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway has refurbished its museum. I always kind of liked the old museum. It was pretty bare bones, but I could always learn some things and get a feel, and just to see those really old cars. Always think is really cool. But really looking forward to the new museum. I hear it's very modern and very cool, so I definitely want to see that. And then, of course, there's the race. Should be pretty interesting. There's a rookie at the pole for the first time in ages, and Roger Penske, the captain, his team is starting at the back of the pack. I guess they had a part that was out of compliance, and I don't know. To me, I think it says something good about the integrity of the league. Roger Penske owns Indy Motorsports. He owns the Indy Racing League and he competes in it, but they'll hold his team accountable just like anyone else. And I think that's the right way to do it. And I wish them luck passing as many cars as they can.
Good stuff, Jamie. Coming up, we'll hear from retail experts about the impact of tariffs on dealers. That's next on Weekend Drive.
Your dealership has no shortage of customer information. But when that data is conflicting, messy, and spread across a multitude of platforms, it's impossible to activate properly. As the automotive industry's first unified intelligence engine, Curator enriches and unifies your customer data across platforms, like your CRM, your DMS, your website, and even your marketing efforts. It then injects that information back into your most vital systems to provide a single view of each customer and equip your sales team with the information they need to close a deal. When one of the largest volume Subaru dealers in the country wanted to tap into its data goldmine, they turned to Curator. In just 4 months, Huberger Subaru experienced a 55% higher closing ratio and a return of 15 times their investment. Want to see it for yourself? Check out the case study at goobagoo.com/curator. That's GUBAGOO.com/curator.
Welcome back to Weekend Drive. I'm Jamie Butters with Kellen Walker. This week, we reported that dealers, despite seeing more sales and higher profits in the first quarter, are increasingly souring on tariffs. This week, our own Hannah Lutz and John Irwin spoke with experts about what they're seeing in the retail space and what tariffs will mean for dealerships. On our latest Congress Conversation live stream, they spoke with Michael Maroney, CEO of Maroney USA, Don Hall, CEO of the Virginia Automobile Dealers Association, Brian Kramer, Executive Vice President of Dealer Growth and Success with Cars Commerce, and Inga Moore, Senior Partner at McKinsey. Here's a piece of their conversation.
Don, you recently surveyed your dealers on the tariff impact. What did you learn?
Well, it was interesting, somewhat predictable probably, and that is that no matter what things are thrown at our industry, we always land on our feet and we make that lemon into wonderful tasting lemonade. And so with the tariffs, I think the biggest thing is it's the unpredictability I think that dealers think about. But at the same time, they're used to that and they survive well through that. But I think the average dealer in Virginia, at least, made it very clear that they wish they had a better idea. But having said that, let's keep our focus. Let's sell new and used cars. And more importantly, let's repair all and any cars we can repair. And I think that's the general attitude of the Virginia dealers, regardless of what is happening literally down the road here in Virginia, outside of Virginia and Washington, D.C.
Mike, how do you expect tariffs to impact dealerships' inventory levels and vehicle allocations?
I think that the inventories today are adequate. it's tomorrow that we worry about. Our allocations over the last 6 or 7 weeks have been about a 50% level, and that's an aggregated number across several brands. So our real concern, John, comes in late June and then in July and August, where we think we'll be very short of product and are already taking steps to address that.
And anyone, please jump in if you have anything to add. Have you, Inga, Brian, seen anything at the inventory or allocation level?
I've seen a lot of dealers that are going back to really fully understand their allocation methodologies and try to figure out, they kind of maybe during COVID took their hand off the wheel because everything was on autopilot and they didn't have to think about that. But now every single consensus or every BOS cutoff point is extremely important to make sure that they're not missing out on allocation.
I think it's also really understanding kind of from an OEM perspective as they are thinking about car flow, kind of what is the inventory level and what is the velocity at different dealers for different trims and make model configurations in different markets, and kind of what is the competitive context, because kind of different OEMs, depending on what is the structure, on how much the core vehicle assembly versus powertrain components versus electronic components deep into the supply chain get impacted by tariffs. It ultimately impacts the price positioning in retail. And so I think there's also, in addition to allocation, and real questions that OEMs are thinking about from an incentive perspective. How do I address that lever to make a product competitive in the market context it plays in?
Yeah, that's a great point, and we're going to get into pricing in just a minute. I had one, question on clarity about tariffs. Don, do dealers understand? Do they know which models on their lots face a tariff and which do not?
I think the general answer is yes. The danger in the industry is to make sure that we ought to be very open with customers and express and show them which cars are actually subject to tariffs and additional fees versus those that may not be as we speak. I think the average customer, and this has been my experience my entire career, if you are honest and open with them about what we're dealing with, I think most of them recognize the need for you to make a profit and the need for them, more importantly, to have a great buying experience. So I think the dealers that are beginning to now show them and say, look, here is a car that is indeed subject to a tariff, or we're not quite hit with it yet. And so whatever the dealers do, I think they've got to make sure that they're disclosing totally with the consumers. But more importantly is don't over-represent tariffs on vehicles that, in fact, do not exist. Don't imply that everything is subject to when, in fact, they are not. And I think the customers expect that honesty and that integrity. And then in doing so, they'll be very happy and willing to buy that vehicle, even though there may be a tariff, built in, because it is legitimate and legal.
Sure.
And Hannah, I agree with what Don said. I will tell you, though, there is no transparency into the magnitude of the tariffs on models. For example, in the Chevrolet lineup, we know what's built in Korea, we know what's built in Mexico, but other than OEM price increases that we've seen on Ford, for example, on a handful of vehicles, there is no visibility whatsoever as to what the impact is on the OEM. It's a deep secret, and my friends on the OEM side say it's very difficult to compute because of all the parts movement across borders, and it's not just where the vehicle's assembled, obviously.
Yeah, that's a great point. So how do you handle that at the dealership level? What is your approach with customers who have questions about price increases?
We basically share what we know. And I think Don's point was have full transparency into what we do know. But to be very candid, we know very little. And the products we have on ground have not yet been impacted by tariffs, but we do know what's coming in will be impacted. And the other place we're seeing it is in parts. For the first time, we saw some fairly significant parts pricing increases in the month of May, which were abnormal.
Overall, Brian, does Cars have a projection of how the tariffs will affect vehicle pricing at an industry level?
Well, we're looking at it on a make by make, because obviously some makes are affected more than others, and some are affected 100%, and some are affected 0%. But we haven't. That I've seen from other sources, an impact of $3,700 per vehicle. But I think that it's very important not to paint a broad brush And I think that it's important to know which ones are and which ones aren't. The ones that are not affected or allegedly not affected, because, as Mike said, there's not a lot of clarity around that currently. But when you figure out which ones are, I think it's very important for dealers not to take their foot off the accelerator on the vehicles that don't have a tariff and try to treat them all under a blanket policy. Some you should get more aggressive on. Some, obviously, you should make sure you're maximizing the profit because the turn rate's not going to be there.
One other comment on that, on the pricing, particularly when we finally see this coming in. The tendency sometimes, as a former young manager in a dealership long ago, is the boss says we got to sell cars, so we're going to go out and sell cars. And we have an opportunity to make some additional gross by saying all these cars are subject to these various tariff amounts, if you will. And I need to remind dealers that there are federal laws that will prohibit that if, in fact, the tariffs don't apply. There are state laws. And so we need to remind our young managers that run these dealerships and handling the desk and so forth, that when we actually start seeing this stuff implemented in the sales side of it, in terms of new vehicles, rather, we need to be very, very careful that we only represent that which is actual. And I think, again, customers don't mind paying that which is actual because they know that we, as entrepreneurs that sell cars for a living, this is not something we brought on them. This was done at a much higher level.
Yeah, and I think that, Don, to your point, there was a bit of a dangerous precedent created with the sales addendums during COVID. And so I think as dealers are looking to build trust with consumers and really get the consumer excited to engage with the dealer, that kind of transparency and not kind of using it as a land grab is really important. I also think, Mike, what you said on parts pricing is really critical because a lot of the dealers we have worked with have really leaned into fixed ops as one of the big profit drivers as they're thinking about 25, 26. And so the part inflation that's really kind of throwing off the 50-50 split between parts and labor and how that gets articulated to the customer is a really important element because it hits the US consumer as we're seeing inflation in a lot of different paces. And so that inflation in the core service component and the impact it has on the ownership experience is also something that we see a lot of dealers really wrestling with and how to kind of communicate this to their customers and walk them through some of the new charges.
Inge, I'll stick with you. How might tariffs impact sales this weekend? Memorial Day, it's always a big weekend for dealers. Will it be again this year, or what sort of changes might we see because of tariffs?
I mean, we have seen a significant pull ahead in late March and early April. Yeah, where we have seen the biggest year-over-year move since 2021, where people really got out into the dealership, bought cars, and really tried to leapfrog tariffs. And that also collided with some of the tax refunds. I think there are still consumers who are sitting on the sidelines that are looking for a deal. But given the level of uncertainty that we have in the market with UK is tariffed, now we have a deal. Yeah, I think it's hard, as I think Don was saying it earlier in the call, for the dealer to understand how this breaks down. For a customer who doesn't even think about it on a daily basis, I think for the dealers who go out with a strong message on this is inventory, this is not impacted by tariffs, this is kind of a customer I move to action on a long weekend by really building value and understanding the needs of the customer, I think you still have some good movement. But I think we need to acknowledge that we took some air out with everything that we pulled ahead into March and April.
I think it's very well said, Inge. And certainly we saw a huge surge at the end of March, and we thought we were the smartest we've ever been in our careers. And from mid-April on, it's been very choppy. It's not been bad, but it's been very inconsistent. And I think as you look at a holiday weekend, which is normally a great selling weekend, like Memorial Day, you're not going to see aggressive incentives. I don't think you'll see aggressive advertising. I think everybody's being quite cost conscious at the OEM level, and appropriately so. So I don't anticipate a big spike. I think it'll be a good sales day, but not a great sales day. Weekend, rather.
John, the comment I was going to make, I think, though, those of us in the business that are selling cars like Mike and so forth, at the end of the day, right now we're in this unique history in our country in that we don't necessarily trust the press and all that's coming out of the press these days. And it's unfortunate or fortunate, it's maybe a little bit of all the above. And I'm not sure consumers understand what they read about tariffs. Certainly dealers even have some difficulty understanding what that is or is not. So I think the key, and I don't want to downplay this, but the reality is if we just be motivated and excited about it's Memorial Day weekend, it's also to honor those people who died in harm's way to serve this great nation. But it's a great time to buy a car. We're excited about it. We've got inventory. I think we can't allow ourselves. And then as we watch the White House, this is not being political, but as you watch what they're doing in the matter of hours, they've done some things even this early morning this morning, and then some votes, what happened today that affect our industry. The reality is there's a lot of optimism out there that even these tariffs, though they hurt as we speak, but long-term wise, no one believes that they're going to be around. It's a tool being used by an individual, a president that many of us either like or dislike, but the reality is he's using that tool. And so I think at the end of the day, we have every reason to be optimistic, be aware of, be prepared for, and think about, but remain motivated because it's still a great time to buy a car in the United States of America.
Our own Hannah Lutz and John Irwin spoke with Michael Maroney, CEO of Maroney USA, Don Hall, CEO of the Virginia Automobile Dealers Association, Brian Kramer, Executive Vice President of Dealer Growth and Success with Cars Commerce, and Inga Moore, Senior Partner at McKinsey. You can find their full discussion on our latest Congress Conversation live stream on Automotive News, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube pages. That's all for this weekend drive edition of Daily Drive. I'm Jamie Butters.
And I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer for his help on today's podcast. You can get the latest news on retail tactics, hybrids and EVs, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com.
We'll be off on Monday for the Memorial Day holiday here in the U.S. Come back on Tuesday for a conversation with Toyota Motor North America CEO Ted Ogawa.
We have to do what make those entry products more competitive, including manufacturing technology such as the automations.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. If you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.